When my mother called and said the family had planned a surprise day for me, I honestly thought it might be something nice. Maybe a small celebration. Maybe a family lunch. Instead, when I arrived at my aunt's house, there were nearly 50 people gathered in the backyard. Relatives, family friends, even neighbors. Everyone turned to look at me when I walked in. My father stood near a microphone with a stack of papers in his hand. He smiled and said, "Perfect timing." Then he began reading a list. First came my sister's achievements. Then, my mistakes. People started laughing. I didn't react. Because I had brought something with me too. If you had asked my parents, they would have told you the comparisons between me and my sister were just motivation. But growing up, it never felt like motivation. It felt like a competition I was never allowed to win. My sister, Claire, was always introduced the same way. "This is our star. Straight A's. Perfect attendance. Student council president." At every family gathering, my parents would proudly tell everyone about her newest achievement. When it came to me, the tone changed. "This is our other daughter," my father would say. Sometimes he'd laugh before adding something like, "She does things her own way." It always got a chuckle. At first, when we were kids, I thought it was harmless. But the comparisons never stopped. If Claire got into a good college, everyone celebrated for weeks. When I chose a different path and started working right away, my parents called it settling. At birthdays, relatives would ask Claire about her plans for the future. Then they'd turn to me and say things like, "So, what are you doing these days?" As if I was still trying to catch up. The worst part was that Claire seemed to enjoy it. She would smile quietly while everyone compared us. Sometimes she even joined in. "Oh, come on," she'd say. "You know she's always been the rebellious one." Eventually, I stopped trying to defend myself. It was easier that way. Easier to sit quietly during the jokes. Easier to pretend the comments didn't bother me. When my parents invited me to this so-called surprise day, part of me wondered if maybe things were finally changing. Maybe this was their way of doing something kind for once. But standing there in the backyard, listening to my father read a list of Claire's accomplishments followed by my failures, I realized something. This wasn't a celebration. It was just another comparison. Only this time, they had an audience. My father adjusted the microphone and continued reading from the paper like he was hosting some kind of game show. "Claire graduated top of her class," he announced proudly. A few relatives clapped. Then he glanced down at the next line. "And our other daughter," he paused for dramatic effect. "Well, she's always been a little more unpredictable." A few people laughed. Some looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable. But my father kept going. "Claire bought her first home at 27. More applause. Then he smiled again. "Meanwhile, someone else here is still figuring out what she wants to do with her life." More laughter. I could see Claire standing near the dessert table, holding a glass of lemonade. She wasn't laughing loudly, but she was smiling. That quiet, satisfied smile that said she was enjoying every second of it. My mother sat beside my father, nodding occasionally like this whole thing was perfectly normal. Like humiliating one child in front of 50 people was just harmless family fun. "Of course," my father continued, "every family has one child who takes the traditional path." He gestured toward Claire. "And one who decides to explore other options." More chuckles spread through the crowd. I sat quietly in my chair, hands folded in my lap, watching it all unfold. For a moment, I wondered how long this had been planned. The microphone, the printed list, the crowd. This wasn't a joke that happened spontaneously. This had been organized, thought out, prepared. Then my father lifted the next sheet of paper. "And finally," he said, "let's review a few life lessons learned from our more adventurous daughter." Another wave of laughter rolled across the backyard. That's when I slowly reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around my phone. Because while they had spent weeks preparing their little surprise, I had been preparing something too. And the moment to use it had finally arrived. My father cleared his throat and lifted the next page. "And now," he said with a grin, "a few lessons our adventurous daughter has taught us." Another ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. That's when I finally stood up. "Dad," I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but the microphone picked it up clearly enough that people near the front turned toward me. He looked slightly annoyed by the interruption. "What is it?" he asked. "Before you continue," I said, "I think everyone should hear something first." The backyard grew quieter. Curious eyes shifted toward me. I walked slowly to the table near the speakers and placed my phone down beside the sound system. "What are you doing?" my mother asked sharply. "Just sharing something," I replied. I tapped the screen. For a second, nothing happened. Then a recording began playing through the speakers. At first, it was just the sound of voices in a living room. Then the words became clear. My mother's voice came through first. "Do you really think she'll come?" My father answered. "Oh, she will. She always shows up hoping we'll finally treat her like Claire." A few guests exchanged confused glances. Then Claire's voice joined the recording. "This is going to be hilarious," she said. "Just make sure you read the list in the right order so everyone understands the comparison." A murmur spread across the crowd. My father's face suddenly turned pale. "That's enough," he said quickly, stepping toward the speaker. But the recording kept playing. "You know," my mother added in the audio, "if she would just stop trying to compete with Claire, life would be easier for everyone." The backyard had gone completely silent now. No laughter, no whispering, just the sound of their own voices echoing through the speakers. And the realization spreading across 50 people that the humiliation they were watching had been planned all along. The recording kept playing. No one moved. My father had stopped halfway to the speaker, frozen like he wasn't sure what to do next. Then another part of the conversation echoed through the backyard. Claire's voice again. "So when you read the part about her job, pause for a second. That's when people will start laughing." A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Then my mother's voice returned on the recording. "Honestly, she should be grateful we still include her in family events." Someone near the back quietly said, "Wow." But the recording wasn't finished yet. My father's voice came through again. "Well, to be fair," he said in the audio, "she has helped us more than Claire ever has." The backyard grew even quieter. My sister's smile disappeared. Then the next sentence played. "If she hadn't helped with the mortgage a few years ago, we might have lost the house." Several people turned toward my parents immediately. My mother's recorded voice followed. "And don't forget she helped Claire with tuition when we couldn't cover it." Claire's face went red. The recording continued. "I just wish she didn't make everything so complicated," my father added in the audio. "She's always been the difficult one." The speakers clicked as the recording ended. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The backyard that had been full of laughter just minutes earlier now felt heavy and uncomfortable. Relatives were staring at my parents. Some were shaking their heads. Others looked genuinely shocked. The story they had been told all afternoon had suddenly fallen apart. My father looked at me like he had no idea what to say. My mother was gripping the edge of the table. Claire wouldn't even look in my direction. I picked up my phone from the speaker and slowly turned back toward the microphone. Because now, it was finally my turn to say something. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. 50 people were staring at me. Just minutes earlier, most of them had been laughing. Now no one was saying a word. I held the microphone loosely in my hand and took a slow breath. "I know today was supposed to be a joke," I began calmly. My voice carried clearly across the backyard. "But after listening to that recording, I think everyone understands something now." I glanced briefly at my parents. Neither of them would meet my eyes. "For years," I continued, "I've been the comparison in this family. The example of what not to be." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Every holiday, every birthday, every family event, it was the same story. I paused for a moment. Claire the success. And me, the disappointment. My sister stared down at the table. "But the truth is," I said, "I stopped trying to compete a long time ago." The microphone felt strangely light in my hands now. I never asked for recognition. I never asked for applause. I helped when my family needed help because that's what family is supposed to do. I gestured toward the speaker where the recording had played. But today wasn't about family. It was about humiliation. The backyard remained completely silent. "So I'm not angry," I said softly. "And I'm not here for revenge." I placed the microphone back on the stand. "I'm just done playing the role you all wrote for me." For a moment, I looked at my parents. Then I looked at my sister. I hope the comparisons were worth it. With that, I stepped away from the microphone and walked toward the gate. No one tried to stop me. Behind me, the party remained quiet. But as I stepped outside into the evening air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom.